I remember the exact pitch of her laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in an obvious way. It was the kind of laugh you give when something confirms what you already believe about a person. We were sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, a yellow legal pad between us, sunlight catching the rim of her coffee mug. The conversation had been clinical until that moment. Assets, timelines, mediation schedules, the language of endings. "I heard you're selling the company," she said, scrolling through something on her phone. I nodded. "The deal closes today." She smirked without looking up. "Great, now you can finally afford alimony." Then she laughed. Not hysterically, just lightly, as if the math of my life had finally made sense to her. I felt the words land, but not in the way she probably expected. There was no spike of anger, no surge of humiliation, just a quiet, settling sensation, like dust finding the floor after something heavy has been moved. She sounded certain that she understood my finances, certain that she understood the sale, certain that she understood me. I looked at the legal pad between us. Numbers we'd written earlier now felt theoretical, like someone else's estimates. I realized she wasn't reacting to what was happening. She was reacting to a version of me she had already decided was real. "I'll be at the office," I said. "Don't work too hard," she replied casually. "You're basically retired now." Retired. I drove to the firm downtown where the final documents were waiting. The conference room smelled faintly of toner and stale air conditioning. My attorney walked me through the signature pages again, though we both knew I had them memorized. This wasn't a sudden decision. Months earlier, when it became clear the marriage wasn't repairable, I had started examining everything more carefully: ownership structures, tax exposure, future obligations. The acquisition offer that came in wasn't a clean buyout. It was layered, a portion paid up front, a larger portion deferred. Equity rolled into the acquiring company, performance milestones spread across years, a required executive role during transition, penalties if I walked away early. It wasn't just a sale. It was a continuation disguised as an exit. I signed anyway, not to spite her, not to outmaneuver her, but because it protected the thing I had spent a decade building, starting from a spare bedroom with a borrowed desk and a second-hand server rack humming through the night. Back then, risk had been a shared word we used differently. To me, it meant possibility. To her, it meant instability. As the company grew, the story subtly changed. The lean years became my obsession. The growth years became our shared success. By the time divorce entered the conversation, the business had transformed again, this time into a financial reservoir she assumed could simply be tapped. I didn't argue with the narrative. I didn't correct it either. By the time I left the law office, the sale was complete. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, hands resting on the steering wheel, engine off. The city noise felt distant, like it was happening behind glass. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt strangely weightless, as if something heavy had been removed, but the imprint remained. My phone buzzed once with a confirmation email. "Wire transfers pending. Documents filed. Corporate formalities concluding the loudest chapter of my professional life in near silence." An hour later, I was back home gathering a few things when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, mildly annoyed. "It's my lawyer." I nodded and continued packing a laptop charger into my bag. Her tone at first was casual. "Hi, Mark. Yes, it closed today." Then she went quiet. I could hear the voice on the other end, faint but sharp, the cadence of someone speaking quickly and precisely. "What do you mean?" she asked. A pause. "No, that's not what we discussed." Longer pause. Her posture changed. She sat upright, eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to bring something blurry into focus. I caught fragments. "Structured compensation, earn-out provisions, restricted equity, not immediately liquid. Tax exposure reduces. Support calculations will need revision." "I don't understand," she said, slower now. The voice on the other end grew firmer, more emphatic. Professional urgency replacing conversational ease. Another silence. Then quietly, "So what does that mean?" A final pause. Her eyes lifted to me for the first time since the call began. Not accusatory, not furious, just uncertain. She ended the call gently, like the phone had become fragile. "What did you do?" she asked. The question wasn't hostile. It sounded disoriented, as if the ground beneath a familiar room had shifted a few inches to the left. "I sold the company," I said. "But Mark said—" She stopped, recalibrating. "He said most of it isn't available." I nodded. "It's tied to performance targets and equity conversion schedules, and taxes, and outstanding debt settlements." "You didn't tell me that." "You didn't ask." The words weren't sharp. They simply existed between us. I sat across from her again at the same table where she had laughed earlier. The sunlight had shifted, leaving the room dimmer. "I'm not trying to avoid anything," I added. "Whatever the court decides, I'll follow." She studied my face, like she was searching for a familiar expression and finding something rearranged. Not defiant, not smug, just steady. The confidence she'd carried that morning, built on projected numbers and confident assumptions, had thinned. The conversation ahead would be slower now, more procedural, less theatrical. There would be no dramatic windfall, no cinematic payout moment, just paperwork, evaluations, recalculations, reality unembellished. I realized then that what had hurt most wasn't her joke. It was the certainty behind it. The quiet assumption that I would always be the smaller presence in the room. The predictable one. The man whose efforts could be summarized in a punchline. Now there was no punchline, only process. Our marriage didn't explode. It receded, like a tide pulling quietly away from shore, leaving scattered evidence of where the water used to be. In the weeks that followed, negotiations became measured and professional. Emails replaced arguments. Schedules replaced speculation. I returned to work under the new ownership structure, attending transition meetings and strategy sessions. My title changed. My responsibilities evolved, but the work remained. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt the need to justify the hours, the risks, or the ambition to anyone waiting at home. There was no celebration, no triumphant moment replaying in my head. Just a calm recognition that I didn't have to shrink to be understood. Some endings don't roar, they settle. And in that quiet, you find out whether you were standing all along.